Speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, a place where you can do all kinds of interactive Torah learning. I'm speaking to you from Efrat, Israel, and I'm going to talk about this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is Parshat Noach. And there are two world-shaking events that occur in this Parsha. The first is the Mabul, the flood that destroys all of humanity. The second, after going through all of that, is the Tower of Babel, Migdal Babel, the Tower of Babel. There's an interesting contrast that can be drawn between these two things. First of all, we know that, and I've said it many, many times, the Torah is not a history book to tell us stories about what happened. Everything that we learn in the Torah, we have to find a way of applying that to our lives today. We have to learn the lessons. The Torah is a book of teaching. The Torah teaches us how to live a life. It is our handbook. So what do we learn? What do we learn about this? First of all, we see from the concept of Noach, what happens? Flood is threatened to come upon the world. God tells Noach about this flood and says, start building an ark, a Teivah. And then you'll be able to go, and you and your family and animals of each kind will be saved. And there's different meforshim as to how long it took to build this ark. One says it was 120 years. Another one, I saw another midrash said it was only 5 years. In any event, it took a long period of time. And just imagine, during this period of time, people are coming up to Noach. What are you doing? I'm building an ark. Why? Because we're going to have a flood that's going to destroy the world. Man, you're crazy. That would be the easiest thing that they would say. The other would be that they want to kill him. So he was protected by God so that they couldn't do any of these things. And he persisted. And then it came time to build the ark. And Hashem tells him in this Parsha, Vayomer Hashem leNoach. God said to Noach, Ba ata v'chol beischa el Teivah. You and all your house should go into the ark. Ki oscha re'isi tzadik lefonai b'dor hazeh. Because I have seen that you are a tzaddik, a righteous person before me in this generation. So of course the Teivah is a means that God gave to Noach to protect him and his family from all of the destruction swirling around him. We also in our lives need our own personal Teivot. We need our personal arks that we can go into. And what is the ark? What is the Teivah that we can go into in our difficult times when destruction is swirling all around us? There is a Teivah. And this Teivah, we're entitled to go in through the concept of Emuna, faith in God. We know that the lesson of Noach, among many others, Noach teaches us to have faith in God, to know, first of all, that in this time that it took to build it, he's not going to be worried about the terrible comments that are made about him, not going to be worried about the threats that are made towards him. He believes in God. He knows that God is going to provide him with a shelter. And then God tells him to go into the ark, to go into this Teivah. Now God refers to him as a tzaddik. He says, I've seen you're a tzaddik before me in this generation. The beginning of the Parsha says, Eila toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was a tzaddik, a righteous person, Tomim b'darosov. Hayatomim b'darosov, he was perfect in his generation, as Elohimis alech Noach. God, rather, Noach was walking with God. In other words, God was an important aspect, the key aspect of his life. That's the Emuna, knowing that you can walk with God. Now the contrast to this is later on in the Parsha. And later on in the Parsha, we have the story of the building of the Tower of Babel. And before we get to that, just one more point on Noach's Emuna. How do we know that he had Emuna? Hashem uses the word tzaddik. How do we know that a tzaddik is Emuna? Well, we learn in Gemara Makos, there's an interesting statement where they're discussing different people who have encapsulated the Taryag mitzvos, the 613 commandments of the Torah, into a few different commandments. And then it says, it quotes Habakkuk. He says, Bo Habakkuk Midan al Achas. Habakkuk came and wrapped up all of the 630 commandments into one statement. Shenemar, as it says, but tzaddik be'emuna so yichya. A tzaddik, a righteous person, shall live by his emuna. So we see that God refers to Noach as a tzaddik in these two places I mentioned before. Therefore, he had emuna. And it was emuna that gave him the ability to have this protection. Now, the next story that is mentioned is the Migdal Babel, the Tower of Babel. So the Torah says, interesting thing, Vayomer ish el re'ehu, one man said to another, Hava nilka dilbanal levanim, let's make bricks, v'nisrasal l'sreifai, we'll burn them hard. And then v'tihi lahem halvena la'evan, because these bricks will be like stone. V'achemer haya lahem lachomer, and it served as a mortar. In other words, they wouldn't have to rely on finding stones that they could cut up to do their building. They'd be able to build anything they wanted because they had these bricks. What an amazing innovation. The next sentence says, Vayomru, and they said, Hava nivne lanu ir umigdal, let's go ahead and build us ourselves a city and a tower, Rosho Bashumayim, and the heaven, the top of it will reach the heavens. But Nasalon Hashem will make a name for ourselves. We'll be famous. So Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, as brought by Rabbi Shia Tursky, asks the question. He says the proper order would be, let's build a city and a tower, and then how they're going to do it, building the bricks. And he says what happened here was they thought that by being able to control the elements, by being able to be in control of how they could build, not having to rely on what God provided them, but being able to build their own bricks and build something, they no longer would have to depend on God. So they could build this tower as high as they want, and they weren't worried about God. This is what it says later on in Parshas, in the Sefer Devorim, Kochi votzmi asud, my strength and my power did this. They figured that we don't have to worry about God. And that, even though they were unified, they had great unity. They spoke one language. They were all together, but they were together for the wrong purpose. And we see this in our modern times. We see that so many people are trying to take God out of our conversation, talking about everything but the existence of God. Everything is just man-made. Sure, we have great scientific inventions, great technologies, but over and above this, it's not our powers that did this, it's God giving us the powers. That was their downfall. And because of that, they were scattered to the ends of the earth. And what they did is contrary to what is said in Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Lozer HaKapar Omer Hakina Vatava HaKavod Votzina Sod Min HaOlam. He said that envy, lust, and the desire for honor put a person out of this world. That's what happened to them. They used their unity for the wrong purpose. My bracha to us all, my blessing to us all, is that we should find our tevot, our arcs, to protect us against the enemy around us, to protect us against whatever's causing us difficulty, physically or emotionally, and do it in the name of God and not look for self-honor. Thank you for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat.